Today's story begins in a narrow stretch of water, a place most people have never seen, a place most people couldn't point to on a map. And yet, nearly every person on this planet depends on it. Every time you fill up a car, every time you heat your home, every time a factory turns on its machines, a cargo ship crosses an ocean, or an airline fills its fuel tanks, there is a very good chance that the energy powering those actions passed through this single, narrow corridor, the Strait of Hormuz. At first glance, it doesn't look extraordinary. On a satellite image, it appears as nothing more than a thin gap between two masses of land, a sliver of blue water sitting quietly between the Arabian Peninsula and the coast of Iran. But appearances are deceiving, because this narrow corridor, barely 39 kilometers wide at its tightest point, is not just another waterway. It is a keystone, a hinge, a single point upon which the energy security of the entire modern world balances. And right now, it sits at the center of one of the most volatile geopolitical situations on Earth. To truly understand the Strait of Hormuz, we need to understand the geography that made it inevitable. The Arabian Peninsula is one of the most oil-rich regions on the planet. Beneath its sands lie some of the largest hydrocarbon reserves ever discovered. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain. These nations collectively hold a staggering share of the world's proven oil and gas reserves. But reserves in the ground are worthless without a way to move them. To the west of the Arabian Peninsula lies the Red Sea, a long, narrow body of water that connects via the Suez Canal to the Mediterranean and ultimately to Europe. This is a vital route, but it serves a different purpose. To the east, the Arabian Sea opens up, a vast expanse of the Indian Ocean that links the region to South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and beyond. But between the Persian Gulf, where the oil fields sit, and the Arabian Sea, where the tankers need to go, there is only one way through, the Strait of Hormuz. Flanked to the north by Iran and to the south by Oman and the United Arab Emirates, this passage is the exclusive maritime exit point for some of the most energy-dependent and energy-rich nations on Earth. There is no detour, no bypass of equal capacity, no alternative that can match what this single passage delivers. Geography made this strait indispensable, and geography has made it extraordinarily dangerous. Let's talk about the numbers, because they are staggering. On any given day, approximately 20 to 21 million barrels of oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz. To put that in perspective, that is roughly 1/5 of the world's total daily oil consumption moving through a passage of water that at its narrowest is barely wide enough for two-way tanker traffic. The shipping lanes themselves, the carefully designated corridors where vessels travel, are only about 3 kilometers wide in each direction, separated by a small median zone. Supertankers, the largest vessels ever constructed by human hands, ships so enormous that their decks stretch longer than multiple football fields. These giants navigate through waters flanked by hostile coastlines, disputed territorial claims, and some of the most heavily armed military forces in the world. The traffic through the strait is not just oil. Liquefied natural gas, LNG, is another critical commodity flowing through these waters. Qatar, one of the world's top LNG exporters, sends enormous volumes of gas to fuel power stations and heating systems as far away as Japan, South Korea, and Europe. And beyond energy, container ships, bulk carriers, and commercial vessels of all kinds use the strait as a critical transit point connecting global trade networks. In total, some estimates suggest that roughly 30% of the world's seaborne crude and petroleum products flow through this corridor. One passage, 1/5 to 1/3 of global oil supply. The math alone should make anyone nervous. But the danger of the Strait of Hormuz is not just about the numbers, it's about who lives on its shores and who controls what happens within them. To the north, stretching along the entire Iranian coastline of the strait, sits the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran has long recognized the strategic value of its position here. For decades, Iranian military doctrine has treated the strait as one of its most powerful geopolitical assets, a lever that can be pulled in moments of crisis to send shockwaves through global energy markets. The Iranian Revolutionary Corps, known as the IRGC, maintains a significant naval and asymmetric military presence in and around the strait. Fast attack boats, anti-ship missile batteries positioned along the coast, submarine capability, mine-laying capacity, and a long history of confrontational behavior in these waters. Iran has on multiple occasions threatened to close the strait entirely in response to Western pressure or military threats. In 2011 and 2012, as international sanctions over Iran's nuclear program tightened, Iranian officials issued explicit warnings. If pushed too far, they said, Iran could blockade the strait, and the consequences for the world economy would be catastrophic. Markets shook, oil prices spiked, and the United States deployed additional naval assets to the region as a show of deterrence. The crisis passed without escalation, but the message had been delivered. Iran's power in this region does not come primarily from conventional military strength. It comes from geography, from the simple, irrefutable fact that Iranian territory overlooks the narrowest point of the most important waterway in the world. History has shown us just how dangerous this stretch of water can become. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, both nations targeted oil tankers passing through the Gulf in what became known as the Tanker War. Hundreds of commercial vessels were attacked, crew members were killed, shipping insurance rates exploded. The United States eventually deployed naval escorts for reflagged Kuwaiti tankers, a major military commitment that drew American forces directly into the conflict. In 1987, the USS Stark was struck by Iraqi missiles, killing 37 American sailors. The following year, the USS Vincennes, patrolling these very waters, shot down Iran Air Flight 625, killing all 290 people on board in a tragic case of mistaken identity. The strait had turned into a battleground, and even after the war ended, the scars remained. Fast forward to more recent years. In 2019, a series of attacks on oil tankers near the strait, attributed to the United States to Iran, though denied by Tehran, sent oil prices surging and raised fears of a wider conflict. Vessels were damaged by mysterious explosions. Iranian forces seized a British-flagged tanker. Surveillance drones were shot down. The world watched, held its breath, and the global economy trembled. In 2021 and 2022, Iran seized additional tankers claiming violations of maritime law. Each incident was a reminder this waterway operates not just under the rules of international shipping, but under the shadow of Iranian power. And each time a ship is seized, a missile is fired, or a confrontation occurs, markets respond immediately. Oil prices move, governments issue statements, diplomatic phones ring, because everyone understands what the stakes are.
So why hasn't the world simply built its way around this problem? It's a fair question, and the answer lies in both engineering and economics. Some alternatives do exist. Saudi Arabia operates the East-West Pipeline, a massive infrastructure project that can move oil from the eastern province across the country to the Red Sea port of Yanbu. At full capacity, it can carry around 5 million barrels per day. The UAE has built the Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline, which runs from Abu Dhabi to the port of Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman, bypassing the strait entirely. Its capacity is roughly 1.5 million barrels per day. These are significant projects, but consider the math. The strait handles 20 to 21 million barrels per day. The The combined capacity of these bypass pipelines around 6 to 7 million barrels per day, and they are rarely operating at full capacity simultaneously. That leaves a gap of 13 to 14 million barrels per day that simply has no alternative route. No pipeline, no canal, no workaround. Building additional infrastructure at the scale required to replace the strait would cost hundreds of billions of dollars, take decades to construct, and would still only address the oil component, not the LNG, not the container traffic, not the dozens of other commodities that flow through these waters. The world built its energy infrastructure around the Strait of Hormuz, and rebuilding it around a different geography is, for all practical purposes, not a realistic option in the near or medium term. The strait is not just important because of what it carries today. It is important because of how deeply the entire structure of the global energy system has been constructed to depend on it. Now let's talk about the present moment, because the situation in and around the Strait of Hormuz has rarely been more tense. The broader context is critical. Over the past several years, the relationship between Iran and the United States has gone through cycles of escalation and failed diplomacy. Nuclear negotiations have stalled. American sanctions have remained in force, crippling the Iranian economy. Iran has responded by accelerating its nuclear program and deepening its ties with proxy forces across the region. Meanwhile, the war in Gaza and the broader conflict involving Iran-backed groups have drawn new lines across the Middle East. American forces in the region have been attacked. Israeli strikes have extended into Iranian territory, and the network of Iranian proxy forces, from Hezbollah in Lebanon to the Houthis in Yemen, has kept the entire region in a state of sustained low-level conflict. The Houthis, in particular, have changed the equation significantly. Operating from Yemen, Houthi forces have launched hundreds of drone and missile attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea, forcing major shipping companies to reroute vessels around the Cape of Good Hope rather than through the Suez Canal. This has added weeks to shipping times and driven freight costs dramatically higher. If the Red Sea route is already compromised and the Strait of Hormuz comes under direct threat, the implications for global shipping would be without modern precedent. The United States maintains a significant naval presence in the region, anchored by the Fifth Fleet based in Bahrain. American aircraft, carriers, destroyers, and support vessels patrol the waters around the strait and beyond. The message is clear. The United States views free navigation through the Strait of Hormuz as a core national interest, and it is prepared to defend it. But deterrence is not the same as prevention, and as tensions between the United States, Israel, and Iran continue to escalate, the probability of a miscalculation, an incident that spirals beyond anyone's intention, remains uncomfortably high. Consider what would actually happen if the Strait of Hormuz were closed, even for a short period. In the first 24 hours, oil markets would react violently. Prices would begin to spike as traders processed the implications of losing 1/5 of global supply. Oil stocks would swing sharply. Futures contracts would go haywire. Within a week, the countries most dependent on Gulf oil would begin activating emergency reserves. The United States would likely tap its Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The International Energy Agency would coordinate a multilateral response. Japan, South Korea, and China would do the same. But strategic reserves are not unlimited. Most countries hold roughly 90 days of supply in reserve. That sounds comfortable until you consider that a blockade with no clear end date creates a different kind of panic than a short-term disruption. The encore effects would spread quickly. Fuel prices at gas stations would climb. Airline ticket prices would rise. Shipping costs, already elevated from Red Sea disruptions, would surge further. Manufacturing costs would increase. Inflation, already a persistent problem in many economies, would accelerate. For Asia, the consequences would be particularly severe. China imports roughly 75% of the oil it consumes. Japan and South Korea are almost entirely dependent on imported energy.
India relies on the Gulf for a substantial share of its oil and gas needs. These are not small peripheral economies. Together, they represent the heart of the global economy. Their slowdown would reverberate everywhere. Some analysts have estimated that a sustained closure of the Strait of Hormuz could push oil prices above $200 per barrel. Others have warned of numbers even higher under a worst-case scenario involving prolonged conflict. To be clear, no one has definitively closed the strait. Not yet. But the fact that this outcome is even within the realm of possibility tells you everything about the fragility of the system we have built. There's a longer arc to this story, and it points, eventually, to a different future. The world is transitioning away from fossil fuels. Renewable energy is growing faster than almost anyone predicted even a decade ago. Electric vehicles are reshaping demand for gasoline. Solar and wind capacity is expanding at record rates. In the decades ahead, global dependence on oil and, by extension, on the Strait of Hormuz will gradually diminish. But gradually is the key word. The International Energy Agency projects that global oil demand will remain substantial well into the 2030s and significant well into the 2040s. The transition is real, but it is not fast. And in the meantime, in the decade we are living through right now, the strait remains as critical as ever, perhaps more so as the geopolitical competition for control of energy resources intensifies alongside the existential competition to dominate the industries of the future. The nations that control energy today have leverage, and they know it. The Strait of Hormuz is, in that sense, both a relic of the fossil fuel age and a live detonator in the present moment. A narrow passage, a global lifeline, a choke point where geography concentrates vulnerability and where the decisions of a handful of actors can ripple outward to affect billions of lives. The Strait of Hormuz did not become important because of politics or war or market speculation. It became important because of physics and geography and the way human civilization chose to power itself. And as long as that remains true, as long as the world's engines run on what flows through that sliver of blue water, the strait will remain one of the most strategically critical, most carefully watched, and most potentially dangerous places on Earth. In geopolitics, the smallest places often carry the greatest weight. Nowhere is that truer than here. This is OGN US. See the world, know the truth.